for the sake of the audience.
So I know double O. It's a little embarrassing when I speak casually, the mic was on.
Stil. onder de haaien daar.
Ja.
Richting de brug.
아, 시작할까요? 네, 그 커피 잘 드셨나요? 바로 그럼 이어서 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 그 이번 세션에서 얘기할 거는 하이퍼 커넥티드 라이프 앤 솔루션들입니다. 그 과연 이제 테크놀로지들이 앞으로 우리의 미래를 어떻게 바꿀 것인지에 대한 이야기들 하고 몇 가지 example과 그 다음에 지금 여기 계신 분들이 모두 네덜란드에서 오셨는데 그분들이 보는 미래 상들, 우리의 삶이 어떻게 바뀌는지에 대해서 이야기를 좀 해보도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 연사로 모실 분은 피터 블럭신데요. 와그닝겐 리서치에서 스마트 파밍 관련 프로젝트 매니지먼트를 하고 있습니다. 박수로 맞이하여 주시기 바랍니다. 피터.
안녕하세요. 저는 피터예요. 만나서 반가워요.
That's cute.
So for all the people who cannot understand Korean, welcome. My name is Pieter Blok, and I'm from Wageningen, from the Netherlands, from Wageningen University and Research. I'm project manager in smart farming, and something to tell about our university. The Wageningen University and Research is based in the center of the Netherlands. We have two departments. We have the Wageningen University and we have the Wageningen Research. Wageningen University is doing scientific education for more or less 10,000 students. And it's quite nice that we are rated as best agricultural university in the world. I'm actually working at Wageningen Research. We are doing contract research. We are into the strategic and applied research. We have more or less 3,000 employees. And we are roughly 150 years ago we were born, basically. And the Wageningen Plant Research, it has a turnover of 150 million euros. So to give a little bit background of our domain, so the agricultural domain, you probably all know the agricultural domain is into the production of food. As you can see on the chart, like food production rates, they really increased after World War II. They even tripled. That's mainly due to research, it's mainly due to innovative industries. A lot has to do with like generating new plant varieties, plant breeding, fertilizers, mechanization. But still, there are some concerns, as you can also see in the red line, like the land which is used to cultivate agricultural crops are getting stable, or they even might decrease due to climate change because of droughts, because expanding cities. So what's the general goal is to produce even more food on less square meters of soil. So we need to really increase food productivity even more. And there's another interesting trend, is that, as you can see in the chart in the middle, people working in agriculture, they decreased in 150 years from 70% of all human labor, they decreased to 7%. So that's also a really concern for agriculture, that less and less people are working in agriculture and less people are really interested in getting into the agricultural domain. But on the other hand, the global trend forecasts that in 2050 there will be 9 billion people. So how do we feed all those people? With less land and with less labor. So that really causes some problems nowadays for agriculture. It's in Europe, it's in Asia, but also US, Australia. The problems are everywhere the same. One important key factor which might solve the problem is the agricultural mechanization. The agricultural mechanization is basically the machines which are used to operate on the fields. But those machines, they really like also economies of scale basically, they really get bigger and heavier. So the consequence is that the soil where we need to grow those crops, which crops need water, crop needs nutrients, that specific soil that's damaged by the heavier machines. So that also is a little bit like a tension. So we really forecast in the Netherlands, but also worldwide, that there's a really need for smart machines. And smart machines, we can make it very interesting and intelligent, but what I call smart machines is basically more dedicated. So smaller machines which can do the operation, do more complex tasks because less people are working in agriculture. So machines also need to harvest, do disease scouting, but also needs to be more efficient. So doing more in less time or with less inputs. And the next slides I want to present to you are really into those smart machines. So I'll give you some insights in the machines we are using in research, but also in industry to really solve these issues in agriculture. So first of all, it's like a Google car, right? It's like an agricultural tractor. And the funny thing, there's no human on this tractor. So it's an automatic tractor. And why are we developing these automatic tractors? Is that based in the apple orchards for the production of apples, you need to spray a lot of agricultural chemicals to keep the crop healthy. But those agricultural chemicals, as I say, chemicals, they are also like, they might cause some problems for human health, for the operator which is operating the machine. So what we're basically doing is developing an automatic tractor. And the automatic tractor is guided by a spraying platform which is automatically determines its spraying liquid based on the amount of leaves which are on the orchard. So that's one simple example of how we can play a little bit around with technology to make machines even smarter for the agricultural domain. Another thing is, that's also the reason why I can speak a little bit Korean, is that we are developing together with a Korean institute, we are developing an autonomous orchard weeding device. And that's a joint collaboration between the Rural Development Administration, they are based in Jeonju in the south. And what we are basically doing, we are developing the same kind of machines, but a little bit smaller and a little bit more dedicated. So these machines are equipped with really sophisticated sensors, but the sensors, they can really like do all the automatic work for a human, which normally human do, but they can really assist in the operations. So we equipped it with a very accurate GPS system. We equipped it with a laser scanner to scan the objects. And we are basically, that's in the next movie, we are basically steering this machine by itself. But the funny thing is that it can also detect when there's like human encounters or when there's like animals on its path. So it really can also detect obstacles. So basically what this machine does, it automatically operates in between a tree row. And as you can see in the movie, that's a little bit funny because that's my colleague. That's the human obstacle, but the machine cannot hit the person, of course, because that might cause problems for the person, it might cause problems for the machine. So what we did is that we are basically developed a lot of like intelligent systems to detect this person. And you will see that the machine will stop, And when the machine stops, it constantly checks if the human is still there, human gone, and the system drives again. So that's like being a little bit more smart in the agricultural domain. Another thing is that we are also developing another problem which is like in agriculture, is like weeds. Weeds are like in between plants and they compete for water, they compete for soil nutrients. But those weeds need to get out for the high production. So what we are doing is basically still a lot of human labor is needed to tackle those weeds. We can use agricultural chemicals like herbicides, but they will be more and more prohibited in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. So we are basically building an intelligent machine to basically cut the weeds based on camera system, computer vision, so on artificial intelligence. And we are basically controlling a pneumatic hoe, which is like a hand which tackles the weed. And yeah, that really goes, that's in the next slide, that really goes up to high speeds. So we are testing here with a Dutch manufacturing company which we are working together. We were testing in lettuce, and basically the movie illustrates that when there's lettuce, you don't need to cut because that's the crop. But everywhere in between the lettuce, there might be crops. So this movie illustrates that and this is based on computers, this is based on computer vision, that everywhere in between the plants, the cutters do their work. And you will see in the next frame that when there's no plant, it will go a little bit further. So it really is intelligent enough to do its own work. So we don't need the chemicals and we don't need the human, which are lacking in agriculture. And these systems, they cannot go to 12 rows, they can drive 8 kilometers per hour, so that's really like, they are really ready to be on the market and to be sold to farmers. So that's also a really interesting operation. This is 8 kilometers per hour, which is quite fast. Another thing, a lot of people use or know about drones, but we are using also drones for crop inspection. We are doing 3D modeling, we're doing like detection of disease and really like try to solve those problems on the field to really get optimized even more. This is also an interesting machine, and it has an interesting background because this is the production of tomato plants. And the funny thing is that 1 kilogram of tomato seeds is even more worth than 1 kilo of gold. That's really like hard to imagine, but it's really true. So it's really valuable. But we are developing a machine together with industry. So we are trying to be a little bit more out of the box thinking, to be creative, to sort these plants. Because a plant is always unique. A plant grows high, it grows low, but all plants are different. So what the system does, it tries to estimate its growth potential, its volume, and that really goes fast. And basically what the system does, it sorts the plants based on size. So when you know when the plant has an exact size, you can also optimize the growth patterns of the plant, and you can really optimize your growth in the greenhouse because every square meter of soil is valuable, as I told. And we also do that in open field. This is like field vegetable, this is broccoli, and we're using 3D. So 3D is like a little bit like, I would not call it very state of the art, but it's quite new. So we're using 3D to basically detect the crop. And if we detect the crop, we can also estimate its size, we can estimate its volume, we can estimate its weight. And that's very interesting because farmers in the Netherlands, but also in US and Australia, they are paid on weight and they're not paid on one crop. And the crop needs to meet certain standards. So basically, in this kind of work, we are trying to make a little bit intelligent system to really detect the crop size. And if we know the crop size, the farmer really knows this broccoli is ready to be harvested and this broccoli is not. So we can make it more selective. And that really saves a lot of costs, and it really saves a lot of effort for the farmer. So we can really profit from that. So that's also a really interesting new technology. Another thing I want to highlight, I'm almost out of time, is a state-of-the-art in what we use in computer vision technology. So last days we were talking about a lot of vision of companies where we want to be in future. I'm talking about computer vision, which is a little bit different. It's using camera systems and software to basically detect interesting scenes or interesting image features. So this is state-of-the-art deep learning, and it basically discriminates from the other technology and the other software, that it's really, it's kind of artificial intelligence. So you really learn a computer to make a distinction between different image features which you normally cannot know. If you take a picture with your camera, you have like a color image. And a color image basically, it consists of 3 layers. It's a red, a green, and a blue layer. And the thing with the deep learning is that we are using hidden layers. We are using image features which are really not in human perception. So that's really powerful for using in those high intelligent machines. One of my last slides to conclude. So we as university and research, we are doing a lot of smart farming. We are building prototypes. We are building new machines. But the really good thing also in the Netherlands is that we want to try to integrate those technologies and those prototypes into the agribusiness. So what we do basically, we have like public-private collaborations in the Netherlands. And those basically are based by Dutch government. And it's a way to cross-pollinate between the public and the private sector. And it's very simple. Basically, you have like, when a company has a problem and they want to solve it by a university, which has basically the knowledge, Dutch government allows and subsidizes those companies. So if there's like a company who wants to invest 50,000 euros in our university, Dutch government thinks, that's an interesting new technology for Dutch industry. So they double the amount of money. So you go from 50,000 euros, you go to 100,000 euros to do dedicated research. And as a consequence, in the agribusiness, in smart farming, in precision agriculture, science would be more applied. But also, industries would be more looking in collaboration between the universities. I think it's quite unique in the Netherlands, and we are building a lot of machines and prototypes which are really like getting disadvantaged by this collaboration. So yeah, that's basically my concluding slide. Thank you for your attention. Kamsahamnida and 안녕히 계세요.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe I can hand it over, Myra. 네, 다음에 발표해 주실 분은 Clear Flight Solution에서 오신 Executive Director 아이샤를 맡고 계신 마이라 그로트 커멜링크 씨입니다. Myra?
Yes, thank you kindly for the introduction. Welcome everyone and good afternoon. I came here as a representative of Clear Flight Solutions, and our company is based in the Netherlands, but we're going to open our first branch office in South Korea very soon, so I'm very happy with that good news. I'm surely going to tell you more about drones in general shortly before I move actually to our product, so Closer, which is also a drone, but it's easier to explain a little bit more about our own. So, let's move. Okay, first, it's important to note that drones can be used for personal use and as for a company, but they are different in regulations. By example, if you want to operate a drone for commercial, you need certifications, and besides that, actually, regulations in each country is different. So you have to check for each country. If you want to operate in another country except for your own, you have to check again the regulations, and your pilot needs to be certified for every different country. And sometimes it's easier to actually partner up with a company that has pilots in that country with a certificate. That's actually one of the issues we look at as a company as well. But if you look to hobby drones, like you buy just to play around with, then you don't need always that certificate. But it is important to know, even if you operate a drone just for fun, check where you're gonna fly. By example, for South Korea, there's a really great application we also use. It's called Ready to Fly. And if you download that on your phone, you can see actually where you're allowed to fly in South Korea. As for applications of the drones, by example, for commercial use, it's perfect to use them for filming, perhaps, or mapping areas, or more important, I think in Asia, they were one of the first to start spraying crops with drones. And, but for personal use, you see a lot of trends, by example, with cameras, and lately the Hoover drone. So you throw it in the air, it stays on one level, and it takes a picture of you or of your group. Very trendy and very nice for social media, of course. But drones bring also solutions to other areas, such as emergency response. On the picture, you can see the ambulance drone, which was developed in the Netherlands by a student at a Dutch university. I will show a little bit more about that in a minute. Also important is that with drones, you can map risky areas. By example, if there has been a natural disaster, you don't want to send your team into the area without knowing the risks. So people use the drones first to analyze the risks of the area where you go. Also, inspections of risky industries, by example, in the oil and gas, for the oil platforms, there are a lot of opportunities there to use your drone instead of a helicopter. Helicopter is pretty expensive to send up in the air to check if there's anything that needs to be changed. So instead, they send a drone with a camera. And the last one is actually related to our business, which is for wildlife. And I will come to that in a little bit more. So I'll start the video. So this is how we're connected by drones.
112 operator, what is your emergency?
It's my dad. I think he had a heart attack. Please help. He's not breathing anymore.
Please stay calm. What's your name?
Joanna.
Good, Joanna. We've got your location. The ambulance drone is on its way. Remove his top shirt to uncover his torso.
Okay.
Great. Can you go to the nearest exit? The ambulance drone is almost there.
Okay. I'm outside.
I'll be talking through the drone now, so you can put down the phone. Now please pick up the drone and bring it to your father. You're doing great. Okay, pull the green lid. Now place the pads on your father's chest. Good, I can see that the pads are properly applied. Joanna, please stay clear of your father. We'll take it from here.
As can be seen, drones can save lives in another way, because sending a doctor will take more time than sending this drone when there's an emergency, by example, for a heart attack. Here are a couple more pictures of industries where drones are used or which are developed. By example, the mapping drone can be seen, but also people are interested in how nature flies, by example, for butterflies or birds or whatever. So the research is going further and further for drones in many different areas. So when going to commercial drones, you see that the competition is pretty high. In several countries, they put the research for drones on the list of wishing to develop faster than any other country. By example, South Korea, as far as I know from my research, is at this moment placed 7th in the world when it comes to drone research. But they want to be the number 3rd right after the USA and Israel. And you can notice that South Korea has been putting a lot of money into researching drones and strengthening their position on the drone industry. And when you start working on drones, it's very important that when you want to put it on the market, you have to solve a problem. Or you have to design something new, trendy, whatever you want to follow on social media, perhaps, like the Hoover camera. I'd like to also show that on this picture is one that actually transports humans from one place to another as if it's a cab. It's actually developed in China, but it is not yet operated, and it's a small chance it might operate in the future, but it's a nice idea, and everyone, of course, likes to think broadly when you can apply drones to which solutions. Actually, I'm also going to now change to our example for what kind of problems we take away. So I think a lot of people still remember the landing of an airplane in the Hudson River. It's very scary and dangerous to think of bird strikes that can actually take down an airplane, and not even considering the damage it takes from bird strikes to airplanes. So what has our company come up with is the following product. So our company has developed the Robird, which is a falcon-shaped drone. And as you could see in the video, it flies exactly the same as a falcon, and the body is also in the same shape as a falcon. This means that birds perceive this falcon as real. Our pilot also learns how to hunt like the falcon. And as you maybe remember from the past, like you have the sheep being herded by a dog. Well, we are herding birds with our falcon. And because it's very realistic, there will be no habituation. So example for bird strikes at airports, if you want to reduce them, we want to apply it with our drone to move them away and make it a hunting area of the falcon, so birds will not come back. Birds are very smart, so if you usually use just lasers, acoustics, they will learn that there's no real danger to them. It's annoying to them, like the lights block their vision, but they're not dying, so they just come back because there's enough food, there's places to sleep, so they come back. But using this drone, they think there's a hunting predator in the area, so they will not take the risk to actually come back because then it will still be flying there. Of course, it's also animal friendly. There are many stories about how they take care of bird strikes in not a certain friendly way. And we're in full control. As you saw, the operator is moving the bird. These are a couple of pictures of the areas you can work with this drone. Of course, the oil and gas and land reclamation. In some couple of countries, if there are birds nesting, you have to stop your operations. That's where we come in. We move the birds away, and operation can still going. Of course, airports are great, and farming as well. So there will be more crops left over instead of birds eating the berries, by example. So going back to control, right now we have pilot moving the drones, but we want to step a little bit up and make it more autonomous to have the bird connected to the area. So but how are you going to do it? Because it has to detect the birds, it has to take off by itself, it has to intercept, chase, and hunt, what now the pilot does, and it has to return to base. And doing all of this, it has to avoid everything in the area. If there's an obstacle, it has to spot the obstacle and go around it, which is not very easy to imply into a machine. So here comes, by example, avian radar integration into the spotlight. Like, we have a radar system, a partner we work with in the Netherlands. They spot the birds from pretty far away, and those birds or those movements are now being reported to the radio control tower at the airports. But those radar images can be implemented in the bird, and that's only a small part of how to start their operations. There's still so much more to develop and how to connect it to each other. So yeah, we hope the radars will give eyes to the birds. And I'm now coming to the last slide of my presentation. Here you can see all the factors that come together when you think of operating at an airport. So actually, drones are not allowed to operate an airport within 5 miles. And you can see that a lot of people can actually, if it were to happen, and they read about it on the internet, by example, they might have critical response on it, like it's not safe. Why should we use it? Well, of course, we fly very safely, and we have developed a safety net for it. And like GPS, you use geofencing for not going on the runways. But explaining that to all the people involved, which you can see on this map, is not very easily. And here comes like the connection back to explaining to everyone again through social media or whatever uses for drones, whatever is very important. You need to keep communicating when you're talking about drones and explain how well it goes. So I think this, maybe anyone has questions regarding how to connect drones and in society perhaps, or no questions?
Yeah, maybe we can wait for the at the end of the session.
Yes.
Maybe we can ask
Right.
questions later.
Thank you.
Very interesting. 다음 내용은 암스테르담 스마트 시티에서 오신 오랫동안 스마트 시티 관련돼서 로우 카본하고 그다음에 하이퍼 커넥티드 소사이어티에 대해서 많은 파티시페이션을 해오셨던 프란스 언톤 페르마스트 씨를 소개해드리도록 하겠습니다. 프란스.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I think we've seen some great examples here on the technological side. What I would like to focus on is more the human side or the social aspects of a smart city. Who consider themselves within the audience coming from a smart city? Can I see hands, please? So that's the whole 2, 3 at the background. Does that mean that the rest of the audience is coming from dumb cities? I don't think so. And that's one of the biggest problems we have within the smart city debate at the moment. There's over 300 definitions on smart cities. So in 2008, when we started off in Amsterdam Smart City, we started off with the definition, how can we reduce CO2 emissions by the combination of electricity and connectivity? In the past 10 years, almost 10 years, we've changed that definition about 8 times, and now it's basically all about the livability of the people who live, work, and play, and visit the Amsterdam metropolitan area. And even if you want to take it to a higher level, and you can make the definition that it's all about the happiness of the people. And of course, then there's the big debate, especially in the academic world, how do you measure happiness? Is there a happiness index? And we have a very simple solution for that. It's called city council elections. If the people are not happy, you will not be revoted into the city council again. The other thing is that smart city is not a goal on itself. It's just a journey you want to go on to, and the concept of smart city and the journey towards smart cities is as important as the end result. In 2016, we were awarded the Innovation Capital of Europe, and it's not as much that I want to do a city marketing talk now, but one aspect is the digital social innovation that played a big part in the jury report on smart cities. And what I would like to do in the next few minutes with you is not only show some best practices, but also the lessons learned from the mistakes we made in Amsterdam. And I can assure you, we learned a lot from our biggest mistake we made in the past, and that was selling Manhattan to the British. After that, we had a prosperous time within the Netherlands. We had the golden age, and Amsterdam was very much benefiting from that part. The trends of the city at this moment is we're going from close to open data, open platform, open source, open innovation. Instead of making plans for 30 years, we now much more focusing on design during the building and the planning. In the past, we had assessments or best guesses, and now we can make our decision much more based on the information that's available. We go from centralized to decentralized, so we go from municipality to community and even to the citizens. So it's very much important that it's end-user centric, and we have the bottom-up approach. So not a top-down, but make sure you get the citizens involved, the end users, in the early stage as possible. As I mentioned, Amsterdam Smart City, it's a unique collaboration. We've seen it also in Peter's presentation about the public-private partnership, and we'd like to add a fourth P to that triple P. So we go from a triple P to a quadruple P, which is the public-private people partnership. Because in the end, if the people do not take the solutions, then in the end, your project will not succeed. The imperatives, the ingredients for Amsterdam Smart City, and it's different for every city in the world, is that you have this political leadership and leave it there. So don't get the political leadership involved in the nitty-gritty, and avoid that they're gonna have their hobby horses and push them through, which will not benefit the citizens in the end. Holistic approach is very, very important, so go cross-silo, because if you do something within the traffic domain and the mobility domain, it always has an impact on energy, it always has an impact on your waste management at the end. And as mentioned before, the stakeholder analysis. Make sure, I think there was a great slide from Myra around the airport, involve all the stakeholders. Even if they're your opponents, make sure you have them on the table and discuss all the things with you. We are an independent foundation, started off in the city of Amsterdam, but we soon realized that the moment you want to do projects and you have to get private partners involved, private partners don't like to deal with governments because of the red tape and bureaucracy. Another collateral benefit we had from was the financial crisis in 2008. So we didn't have any money available from the government anymore, and we had to go to the private sector to get the finance from there. And another important thing we learned is, as soon as you put a platform outside of the government, your projects are allowed to fail. And I think failure is one of the great lessons learned in Amsterdam. Allow for failure. So because it's outside of the government, if a project fails, it doesn't have immediately political consequences. As I mentioned, open is key, cross-silo, and we're just a matchmaking platform. We do not have money. As we truly believe that you have to go from subsidy to investment, because if you subsidize projects and the subsidy stops, usually the project stops. So if you have money available from local government, make sure it's an investment, and they will have the return on investment as well. And for a local government or for a central government, return on investment does not always have to be financially. Return on investment can also be reducing unemployment, reducing congestion in the end, as long as it benefits the end user, the citizens. We have a very, very small budget, 1 million, and the most important part of this slide is that the private partners not only contribute financially, but also they have one full-time equivalent. They contribute to Amsterdam Smart City, apart from all the people they put into the projects. As I mentioned, collective approach is important. Central position, knowledge dissemination. As well as Peter was mentioning, it's very important that you get knowledge institutions involved to measure things and to give feedback from an academic point of view that will help you to build your other projects. And partners have to have an active role within the City of Amsterdam. If a partner or a private partner or a public partner is involved in a project and sitting there only and stealing information, we kindly ask them to leave the project. We have a change in role. As I said, we started off in 2008. So we started off as a project manager. We're now much more of a community manager. And in the past, the government was in the lead. Now the private partners are in the lead. They decide which projects they're going to take on, and they decide the agenda. And in the future, we just want to be a platform with one step further and have the citizens in the lead of the projects. As soon as a project comes on, we are heavily involved. As a project runs, then we'll take our hands off it and we just monitor the progress. And in the end, if a project succeeds and is ready to scale, then we're getting involved by helping the project and the partners to find more money or more resources to get their project running. It's all about collaboration, as I mentioned. This is just a snapshot of all the partners, and this overview changes basically every day by people and partners getting involved and people and partners getting away from projects. There's so many cities in the world that do a lot of things on smart cities, so it's important that you cross-fertilize and learn from each other, and that's why we set up this not-for-profit collaboration called City Protocol, and it's based on the anatomy of a city. You and I, we mainly have the same anatomy, so if there's a problem with your arm and you can describe the problem and you can describe the solution, it's the same with cities. Cities are built up of water, waste, energy, so if there's a problem with waste in one city, it's easily to copy and to adapt in another city. The next little video will give you a very short overview of basically what we're doing in Amsterdam.
Amsterdam Smart City is the innovation platform of the Amsterdam metropolitan area, which challenges companies, residents, the municipality and knowledge institutions to develop and realize smart solutions for today's urban challenges. Today we're more connected than ever to the people and technology around us. Solar and wind energy powers our homes, while a smart app tells us when our car needs to be charged. Sometimes technology is the driving force behind innovation, sometimes it's common sense. Take a ladder, for instance. You may only need it a couple of times a year, so why not share it? The same goes for energy. If you generate more than you need, you can give your surplus to your neighbor or sell it. By working together smartly and openly share knowledge and data, we expand our horizons and are able to come up with new ideas and solutions, such as helping to prevent traffic jams and long waiting lines. Data can also help us to determine appropriate regulations for maintaining balance in our cities. Well-managed traffic flows and good water management, for example. By continuously working together and innovating in areas such as connectivity, mobility, energy and healthcare, our city stays connected with the future. The solutions we're working on today not only make living in and around Amsterdam more enjoyable and sustainable, they also make the city a safer and more social place. A place that's equipped for the future that starts now.
So basically this gives a brief overview what we're doing about sharing economy, etc. Another lesson learned is that we dedicated 3 areas within the City of Amsterdam, and that were the living labs. But some projects, some initiatives, they just need another area. So we got rid of that and we made sure that the whole city now is a living lab. So whenever there's an idea, people can do and use the city as a living lab. Amsterdam conditions, we're very, very jealous on a city as like Seoul because of the fastest consumer fiber network. We're getting there slowly in Amsterdam, but it's one of the imperatives to build a smart city and to maintain a smart city. Again, roles are very, very important. The role of the local government, for example, is to open up the data, then let developers do their job. Don't as a local government, don't develop your apps yourself, but let other people do that and make sure it's available for your citizens. Data, working together now with Google in Amsterdam, the combination of the data gathered by Google Maps and the data that are opened up by the city government can predict now on a stretch of 100 meters if there's a parking space free within the city center of Amsterdam. And looking for a parking space is the second biggest source of CO2 pollution caused by consumers. Another thing is we focused a lot on attracting visitors to our city, and we forgot to ask about the citizens in Amsterdam, what they think of it. This was made by a citizen that just got sick of the sound of the trolleys early in the morning because the British people having their stag nights in Amsterdam chose the EasyJet cheap flights, and they're never leaving at 9 in the morning, but always leaving at 6 or 7 in the morning. So they were just asleep after the noise that was produced by all the people getting out of the pubs, and then in the morning, at half an hour later, all these people came down with their trolley, tick, 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 and they just got crazy of it. So that was an eye-opener for us to discuss again with the inhabitants, the citizens of Amsterdam, to see how we can find a solution. And Amsterdam, it's a global village. It's only 800,000 inhabitants, and we have over 17 million visitors each year. For example, yesterday was King's Day, national holiday in the Netherlands, and Amsterdam usually expects then about 2 to 3 million people. As I said, it's mainly driven by partners. PostNL is the Dutch national post service, and they realized that letters are not being sent anymore. So they see how they can use their people in different ways. One of the ways is just to do the meter readings for utility companies, but they're also the ears and the eyes within a neighborhood and can detect all kind of problems that are occurring in the neighborhood. The other thing is that if you order a very small thing by the post, it always comes in a huge box. So what the post office, or what the postman now does, is asking if you would open up the parcel in front of them, see if it's okay, and then they take the packaging back with them, and they found a business model in it. As I said, we've learned a lot from our failures, and out of the 70 projects we started off with, only 17 succeeded. Does that mean the other 53 were wrong? No, they were not wrong, but the timing was wrong, the technical availability was wrong, or there was a wrong role of government. So that's why we created something called the Innovation Graveyard. Put all the projects that failed onto this innovation graveyard, look at them every 6 months and see if they're ready to scale now. I have to hurry up. Another thing is this is a project by Alliander, the electricity grid operator. They want to have a solar panel for every Amsterdam citizen, but they have to find other buildings like big conference centers to put those solar panels on. And this is another thing, locally stored and locally generated electricity will benefit the Amsterdam citizens. That's where we created in a certain part of Amsterdam the smart grid, and basically they're only using the main grid as a backup. Amsterdam Arena, they just started after they're putting solar panels on their roof. They collect now the old batteries of the Nissan Leaf cars because they only have a capacity of 70%, put them in big stacks and use them for the peaks and the shortages in the electricity supply. Again, I conclude, citizen central, crucial position, listen to your citizens, get them involved in the early stage as possible. Lessons learned, this is why a lot of projects didn't succeed. Most important role, if you have an idea, you come to Amsterdam Smart City, it has to comply to one of the 3 bottom criteria. It's improving the efficiency of city operations, growing the local economy, and last but not least, contributing to the quality of life of citizens. There's a wonderful report written by the University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam about all the lessons learned. I can highly recommend to have a look at it if you want to build a smart city. Again, conclusions, city is an open platform. products and services have to be user-centric. You have to go from a paradigm shift from ownership to availability. In the city center, you do not need to own a car, but as long as there's cars available, and probably one of the most important lessons I'd like to share with you, allow for failure and allow for uncertainty, because the technological developments are going so fast that it's really, really difficult to predict what's happening in 2 years' time. Again, why we did it, the definitions. Join our new community, amsterdamsmartcity.com/register, and you will be kept updated, but you can also post requests if you're looking for solutions. As I mentioned before, in 2008, we started off with a definition, how can we reduce CO2 emissions by the combination of electricity and connectivity. I don't need an excuse to visit this beautiful city and this beautiful country, but it's a little bit of a paradox that I need to burn so much CO2 emission to help you to save a lot of CO2 emission reduction. So thank you very much for your attention. Hope to see you either in person in Amsterdam or more CO2 friendly. Hope to meet you virtually soon. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Frank Anton. 네, 다음에 소개해드릴 분은 그 알리안츠 생명에서 한국에서 CEO를 하고 계시는 요스 라워리어스를 모시도록 하겠습니다. 요스, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, 안녕하십니까, and goedemiddag. I usually don't see Dutch people in Seoul, and I've been living here for about 8 years, so I'm very happy with that. I'm from Amsterdam, and I think it's a very smart city. Now I'm a Solite or a Solite, and I'm a fellow citizen of Seoul, and I think we are 15 times bigger than Amsterdam, and we should be 15 times smarter soon. So let's do that. Okay, I'm the CEO of Allianz Life Korea. It's an insurance company, and normally talking about insurance is not as sexy as the subjects that we have covered today, but I'm going to change that, and you will see that in about 14 minutes from now. Our company name will change, so it will soon be called ABL Life, because we have a new shareholder. I just want to make that point before I start. Okay. So this is myself. I've studied in Amsterdam, currently with Allianz Life and living here. I lived in about 4 other countries as well, most of them in Asia. And I can compare a little bit. And I think when we talk about digital, actually Korea is a very digital savvy country. However, in financial services, the industry I work in, it is not that digital yet. Earlier this week, and this is not about the picture of the bald guy that you have in front of you right now as well, it's about the title. It was in the newspaper on Monday about our company. In Korea it reads Chongyakdo, Sangdamdo, Modu, Online-ero, Hamnida, which means purchase and service everything online. And that is something that is quite common in other countries for insurance companies, not in Korea. In Korea, financial services, compared to other OECD countries, are old-fashioned. They're dinosaurs, and there's a lot of innovation that still needs to happen there. And we are trying to drive that innovation. Why do we do that? Because we believe customer behavior is changing everywhere, and there's a huge opportunity in this area, especially with some trends that are going on and needs that are there. And I want to talk about that in terms of connectivity and how we can use applications to change this paradigm of insurance. One of the trends we've already talked about earlier is the demographic trend, aging populations, right? So this is in 2015, and the dark blue, that's only Japan to my knowledge here, has 30% or more of the population being older than 60 years, right? Now we're going to jump to 2050. You see, first of all, there's a lot more dark blue, so a lot more populations with 30% above 60 years old. You see also a lot more light blue, even emerging in Africa, countries that have 10 to 30% of their population above 60 years old. Korea, all of a sudden here, is also in dark blue. Korea, actually, at this moment, has about 13%, 65 years and older, and that will jump to close to 40% in 2050. So it's not even 30%, it's 40%. So Korea is aging very rapidly. As you saw in my previous slide, my first slide, at the bottom, I have 3 sons. Most of you don't. right? Koreans, they don't have many children, and it's very important that we get more children. So please do that if you have a chance. Okay, so people are living longer, and that's a great gift, right? So you have been given an unprecedented gift. If you live longer, you can do more. You can enjoy life more, you can enjoy your family more, your children more, your grandchildren more. There's a lot you can do. But the quality of life is actually not keeping pace with people getting older. This is data from the US. I couldn't find Korea data, but this is data from the US. And you see here on the top, 60-year-olds, 90% of them suffer at least one chronic disease, most of them diabetics. That's the biggest category, is 23%. 25% mental diseases, such as dementia. 85-year-olds have the highest suicide rates, actually, the highest suicide rates in the US, 85 years old. 75% of the actual health spent in the United States is spent on health care. Something is wrong and needs to be fixed, okay? 75% of the healthcare spend is spent on that. Only 1% is spent on preventive care. Over lunch, we had a short discussion about this. I don't think it's very different in Korea, actually, right? And there's a lot of lobbying against actually spending active money on prevention, because doctors make money on healthcare, not so much on prevention. The bottom line is, the bottom you see there, every 15 seconds an elderly falls in the United States and needs hospital treatment, and every 29 minutes an elderly falls and actually dies. So what is healthy aging? The definition of that, as we see it in our company, is healthy and active aging is a process to achieve physical, mental, social well-being throughout the later years, right? So what are the differentiating factors in terms of aging? First of all, the absence of poverty, access to healthcare systems, community-enabling environments, and lifestyle, where we live, health behavior, etc., and the prevention and knowledge. However, when we talk about insurance, the industry I work in, this is traditionally where we are active in, right? So we are insurance companies, life insurance companies, because we sell pensions and annuity products. We take care of people having no poverty when they are in trouble or when they get older. And we also create that they have access to healthcare. So this is the traditional area of where life insurance companies are active in. As I said, we are, as in insurance companies, we are generally like dinosaurs. We are quite old-fashioned. Insurance policies is a little bit different in Western countries than it is in Korea. But typically in Korea, life insurance policies and health insurance policies are sold. They are not bought. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, today I'm gonna call my insurance agent and I'm having a nice talk with him and I want to have an insurance policy. There are very limited touch points with customers. Yeah? Typically, you buy a policy and you contact the customer, he contacts you again 30 years later when he has a claim. In the meanwhile, you get a lot of paper at home every year and that's it. It's quite often an unpleasant customer experience. You have to talk about scary stuff and you have to pay a lot of money. There's a lot of paperwork. People don't like it. It's an intangible product until claim settlement. Claim settlement's usually also not fun because you just had something not so pleasant happening to you. So the focus is therefore on financial and medical needs only. And we see that as a very old-fashioned approach. There are, meanwhile, two trends that are important and that we believe will change this. First of all, and this is an example that I often use, this is mostly for the Koreans here, coffee is coffee just like insurance is insurance. Now, I first worked in Korea in 2001. And if I wanted a coffee, this is how I drank coffee, right? There was no Starbucks, no Angel in Us, no Coffee Bean, nothing. 2001, this is the only way to drink coffee in Korea, okay? Today, this is how we drink coffee in Korea. However, coffee is still the same, right? So what has changed? What has changed? The machine gives coffee, Starbucks gives coffee. What has changed? People often say it's a lot more expensive. That's true. It's a lot more expensive. But what has changed is the packaging, the customer experience, the customer engagement, the intimacy, the brand. Even the smell and the music is different, right? So what is it? Is the coffee different? It's actually not. It's the ecosystem. It's everything around it that's different. So I also say insurance will not change in the future. Insurance will stay the same. It's the ecosystem we have to think about. That will change. Right? Second trend, and that's a lot talked about here already, technology. Everything today can be decided, controlled, accessed, communicated, bought with the tip of your finger. Right? Here you see what happens in 1 minute. This is a slide that most of you will have seen probably, all the activity that's around there. The need to be served everywhere, all the time, anywhere, all the time. And the access to information empowers people to compare and make decisions by themselves. So these two trends, the ecosystem that becomes important and the technology developments. And we believe that that will dramatically change the dinosaur of insurance companies. So what does it mean for insurance companies? The traditional sales process you see here on the left-hand side. There's the headquarters of the insurance companies, that where I spend most of my days. Then there's the customer, the insurance sales agent, and in Korea, the sales agents, insurance sales agents have a reputation of being quite pushy and being a not always pleasant experience for consumers. Usually there are about 62 pages to go through with these insurance agents, and there are usually about 8 to 10 signatures to be made. Right. So this is the paradigm shift. The purchase to claims process with the limited touch points, the unpleasant customer experience, and the intangible product until claims settlement, from purchase to claims. This is what we currently experience. And we believe that will be changing towards a more ecosystem of activities in between the purchase of the policy via a connected world, via social media, connectiveness via wearables, healthcare management, preventive care, towards the end, which ultimately in an insurance process can be indeed a claim. Okay.
Hi, we're Oscar. We wanted a health insurance company that works better. If happens, well, come visit our site. We'll show you the nearest doctors and hospitals and let you know what they cost before you go. But why go see a doctor when they can just call you? With our doctor helpline, you get help within an hour. We didn't like paying for generic prescriptions, so we made them free. We all have digital timelines now, so we made one for your medical history. You know, accidents suck. But your health insurance doesn't have to. We're Oscar, a new kind of health insurance company.
Now, for everybody who thinks I'm trying to make commercial for my own company, this is not our own company. This is a very different company. This is a very small company that was founded by the brother of Jared Kushner, who is in the Trump administration right now, coincidentally. It has 40,000 customers. It just came up as a startup, this company, in New York, the state of New York, and they're expanding now over the US. But they set up completely differently. They focus on purchase, and then they focus on connectivity in between, in actively communicating, being inside of the pocket of their customers via a smartphone, and then coaching the customer along the way. And ultimately, yes, they're an insurance company, they pay out a claim, but they connect with the customer along the way. So this is Oscar. It's also, coincidentally, it's the first company, insurance company that Google invested in. And I think that's a very important sign that this company is of the new world. It's a new world insurance company. This is another picture. Please pay attention to the sentence that says that share photos with a doctor, get diagnosed, but confidentially, of course. I think that's important, looking at the picture. Okay. I mentioned Google. This is Larry Page, the founder of Google. Larry Page, very famous guy. He applies in Google the toothbrush test. I don't know if anybody has heard of the toothbrush test. We now apply it in our company when we come with new digital solutions. Google will never invest in a solution or a company to invest in if the solution cannot be used at least once a day like a toothbrush. So if you would apply the toothbrush test to a traditional insurance company where you buy the product, nothing happens for 30 years, and then you have a claim. Most people brush their teeth more than once every 30 years, right? So that doesn't pass the toothbrush test. I think that Larry Page invested in Oscar because of the smart connectivity of this insurance company, and Oscar actually passing the toothbrush test. So technology changes and challenges everything, and through wearable devices, people will get connected and their everyday lives can get measured, and ultimately insurance products can be sophisticated, made more sophisticated, and actually benefit from that. This is the future, we believe, of digital healthcare. The first one is a solution that we launched here in Korea. We are the first with AllRight, is a solution of Allianz Life Korea here in Korea. We are the first ones that actually are connected with a health app on a wearable. And if you do your 10,000 steps or you meet your exercise goal, the next month you get a premium payback. We are experimenting with that. Oscar, we already talked about, basically associated agencies and an insurance company providing this service to the customer. Step 3 will be predict diseases via smart devices and wearables. And the fourth step, the last step, will be actually artificial intelligence, such as Watson, IBM Watson already is trying to do. This is how how AllRight works. Basically, you buy the policy, you do that completely online, you install the app, and via your wearable you get points, and you get the premium payback the next month. In the near future, the ecosystem, we believe, will become more important. There are some other solutions that I can show here. First of all, there is the what we call a Noom for diabetics. It's a solution that actually helps people in type 2 diabetics, basically a pre-stage of diabetics, where they are being helped and coached through so they don't develop to the real diabetics when it really becomes a problem. And that's a digital tool. It's a Korean company, Noom, that we partner with, and they have currently around the world 45 million users. And the second solution is, it's actually a bra. It's a breast cancer detection bra. It's being developed, and it actually, Allianz Group is working with this company where women wear this bra about 2 hours a month, and then it will be sensed, and there will not be the unpleasant experience of having breast cancer research done. There's a small video clip on that as well.
My mother and my sister both passed from breast cancer.
So what we have is a wearable device, a bra that helps detect breast cancer.
That is huge.
This technology could really be a game changer.
This could save your life.
Technology pioneer Rob Royer is on the verge of something big.
3 friends in the last month developed breast cancer. Could we have been there? This is kind of everyone trust that we can get there.
The journey.
To get people to meet us this time was quite a challenge.
I'm sorry, I'm not saying what you like to hear.
The design of that device would require more time than we have.
If we don't get the prototype today, I can't start on the project. What if we don't get to market?
The customers.
There are patients dying every day.
Anybody in this room ever been diagnosed with breast cancer that wished to share? 1, 2.
Can the internet, when connected with everyday things, beat cancer?
Okay, interesting. What I found in this video clip is that it's only men who are working on this project, but apparently they can develop a bra that is functional. And by insurance company, we are partnering because breast cancer is one of the most cancers happening to females, obviously. But this is an experiment that we are doing in Germany right now. Conclusions, to Bill Clinton's comment in 1992, we believe it's the economy stupid, or the ecosystem in our case. A window of opportunities to improve healthy aging, that we believe. Insurers should focus on solving customers' daily life problems, and not just when there is a claim. Insurance companies will become health and lifestyle improvers, and we believe that eventually all dinosaurs, like insurance companies, can become young and sexy again. Thank you very much.
자, 지금까지 그 네 분의 그 스마트 하이퍼 커넥티비티에 관련된 이야기들을 들으셨는데요. 혹시 들으시면서 질문이 있으시면 지금 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다. 네, 이쪽에 계신 가운데 계신 분.
네, 먼저 드론 기술에 대해 질문하고 싶습니다.
It's about drone, Mayra.
Could you translate?
Yeah, I will try. 말씀하십시오.
드론 기술이 발전할수록 같이 이제 발전되는 부분이 안티 드론 기술인데요. 기술사 발전의 경험으로 미뤄볼 때 어떤 기술의 발전보다 그에 대항하는 안티 기술들이 훨씬 발전이 빠르고 사람들이 열정적으로 더 참여하게 되는 그런 경향이 있는데요. 드론 기술도 마찬가지로 더 중요한 공공기관에 쓰이거나 어떤 인명의 구조나 어떤 좀 약간 리스크가 있는 사업에 더 넓게 쓰이기 위해서는 이런 안티 드론 기술에 대한 어떤 솔루션이나 대비책이 개발되어야 할 것으로 보이는데요.
제가 잘 못 들었는데 안티 뭐라고 그러셨죠?
안티 드론, 안티 드론.
안티 드론이요?
예.
네.
여기에 대한 어떤 대비책을 가지고 있으시며 어떤 솔루션을 개발하고 계신지 듣고 싶습니다.
Some of the drone technologies are being used on the drone technologies with the anti-drone technology, which I'm not very sure about it. But in terms of the when the drones are being used on the areas or environments where the risk is pretty high, then do you have any thoughts about on the drones and anti-drones?
Well, as for our own operations, we work very close. By example, when we work with airports, we work directly with the control towers, so it's very safe to operate. But we do know about a couple of anti-drone systems that some try to use to block the GPS location or to shoot it out of the air with nets. But like the police in the Netherlands is even having eagles trained to actually take out the drones from the air. So yes, people are working on anti-drone systems, but we're not very scared of those systems because we make sure we operate in a safe way. So I don't think you have to worry too much about anti-drone systems in general. Like it is safe to operate, and it will be good to have developments in anti-drone to keep certain areas safe. But being caught when you fly a drone where you're not allowed to fly, there are very strict rules on that, and I don't think you want to be caught at areas where you're not allowed to fly.
네, 여기 질문 먼저 좀 받아볼까요? 여기 앞에서 좀 질문하시겠다 그러시는데. 아 죄송합니다. 바로 이어서.
네, 저 농협 손해보험에 근무하고 있어 농업 관련 여쭤보겠습니다.
네.
우리 농기계 관련해서 우리 대한민국에는 수도자기 대부분입니다. 그래서 벼를 이양할 때 이양기를 한 번 쓰고 그다음에 이제 한 5개월 후에 추수할 때 이제 콤바인을 쓰는데 이 효용성이 서양 같은 경우는 밭농사기 때문에 주로 한 번 해갖고 트랙터가 계속 작용을 하는데 우리 같은 경우는 효용 떨어져 갖고 이런 부분에 대해서 어떤 조언이라든가 방안을 좀 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
The Korea is intensively rice-growing agri country. The problem with the agro countries in Korea is mostly on a wetland-based plantations, where most of the European plantation field was dry land.
Yes.
And it takes about from the planting to the cropping takes about 5 to 6 months. And do you have any thoughts about those wetland automation, smart farming applications?
It's indeed true that agriculture in West is completely different than the East, so I cannot deny that. The thing is, so we are based in the West, so we are not very specialized in those paddy field conditions. Still, I know from the organization we work together with in Jeonju in South Korea, that there will be or there are systems being developed also which can operate in paddy fields in like really moisture, like unstructured conditions. And people think about more like floating devices or like devices which can really like how do you say, a caterpillar to really like operate on those conditions. And maybe there's one analogy with Western Europe, that in Western Europe they are developing machines which try to touch the soil as less as possible. So they are also changing the cropping system. So what they do is they basically build a very wide machine, but not very heavy, but wide machine, which only operates on each track each year. It's called controlled traffic farming. So basically every path is executed each year, but the soil in between those paths are not driven on. And that might also be somehow in a little different configuration. It might also be possible for even for paddy wet conditions, but you have to redesign the system to local circumstances. That's the thing, I think. Yes?
Abud, can you wait for a minute? There was one other person online already, so.
저도 피터 블록 차장께 질문을 드리겠는데요. 아까 그 스마트 농업 기계나 혹시 그 농업 분야에서 어제 발표했던 그 혹시 블록체인 기술이 혹시 적용 가능한 혹시 섹터가 있는지 하고 혹시 지금 현재 연구 중인 분야가 있는지 좀 궁금해서 질문을 드렸습니다.
Yesterday there has been a lot of discussions on blockchain in terms of financial and smart industry. Would there be
That's a
any
really out of the
ideas?
box question, to be honest, but it's nice to maybe answer. Yesterday I was like, blockchain is really about I'm not very familiar to the term blockchain, to be honest. I think it has to do with a lot of security, right?
Yeah, and the history of the certain products, so from the seeding to the cropping and consumers.
Yeah, so you maybe
history.
I think you can maybe relate it to modular systems instead of really only dedicated software. So basically, with some new development in mechanization machines, we try to make those machines like building blocks. So it's a little bit like blockchain. You make like modular systems. There are systems available which can execute more operations than only the operation which was intended to. But blockchain is also has to do maybe with linking software to be more intelligent. But that's, yeah, I think the blockchain principle particularly hold for the financial sector, to be honest. But still there are some analogies possible with agriculture, but you have to think about design and you have to think about software to be really applicable, I think. Modular, to be very modular. That's the thing.
And Dr. Abud was on cue. Can you wait for a minute, please? So many questions, which is good. Dr. Abud, can you? Sorry.
No, I just wanted to help with answering the blockchain question.
Okay.
I briefly, you could say, alluded to that yesterday, but blockchain can very much be used in the food industry to detect and determine the source of where the food comes from. And actually companies like Alibaba are experimenting with blockchain to weed out the fake food, because you can track the food through the process. Same applies for an Australian beef manufacturer. They're actually using the DNA of the cow to track what's happening to the meat and the meat production. So blockchain is very much a relevant technology which you can use in the agricultural industry in that sense.
I think even in dairy production in the Netherlands, it's already applying. So yeah, that's maybe an even better example with help of Fritz.
Thank you again. My question is related to smart agriculture. In terms of cost-benefit analysis, do you think this is applicable mainly where labor cost is expensive? I mean, if you look at African countries, would this technology still be cost effective? Thank you.
Not yet, to be very honest. Those technologies develop in places where the problems arise the hardest, or where the problems are most appealing. Like in US, for example, those labor problems also with the former presidential election. It was a funny story because last year I was in US and a lot of agricultural people told it would be very good for agricultural robotization and it doesn't matter which president will be chosen, because Trump closes the border by Mexico, so we have no Mexicans doing the operations, and Hillary Clinton will raise wage. So also labor becomes more expensive. But it's quite trivial that you're seeking out for intelligent machines, and that's also outside agriculture, but you try to seek out for new intelligent solutions to really solve that problem. I think a labor problem is it's a quite big problem in US and in the Western countries, but also it arises in Australia and in Japan, I think also, and in Korea there's also some problems. So it's a little bit scattered, but it has to do with labor costs, but it also has to do with availability of labor, because a lot of farmers they want to pay, but there is no human available in most Western countries. So those technologies first develop there, and then probably it goes to also to countries which are, which those problems are less appealing, but still they will come. I think also with the Google car and with robotization, it will have our life. So why not in farming? But it can take a little bit longer, maybe. That's the key thing.
Labor resources. 오케이. 혹시 다른 질문 또 있으신가요? 네.
Hi, this is a question for Mr. Luerier. I thought your talk about disrupting health insurance was really interesting, with Oscar Health as an example. But I guess I'm wondering, how can innovative companies and like Oscar deal with traditional regulatory regulations still in place? Like, for example, for Oscar, as far as I know, it has experienced a lot of setback because the health insurance environment is changing so much under the Trump administration. So, like, how can disruption to improve health insurance deal with being sustainable across changing political environments?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think that any disruptive player, a disruptor, always faces regulatory environments in any industry, right? Whether you have an inventive innovation around disrupting the taxi world, like Uber or Lyft or Grab, they face in many countries, like Korea, a lot of regulatory obstacles. Digital healthcare faces huge obstacles, mainly also played out by lobby groups, like the taxi lobby groups protest against Uber. The doctors in Korea are not happy with digital healthcare. I visited hospitals in India that have whole television studios with doctors sitting there and servicing customers via camera in remote villages in India, and even going abroad to Africa to service customers remotely and patients remotely. But in Korea, digital healthcare is not allowed, and we have to be very cautious there. I said that the All Right app that our company launched in Korea, we do a premium payback in the month following the month you exercised, and that was measured on your app. The reason we do a premium payback is because we're not allowed by regulation to give a discount. So this is circumventing regulation, you could say. It could also say, like, you know, we are trying to innovate, and we're working with the regulator. I think the Korean regulator, for instance, is very cooperative. They want, but they also they want to innovate. They promote fintech, as you know, insurtech, but they are struggling also with keeping pace with the developments in the industry. And Oscar obviously is facing the same problems. Ultimately, we all know it will move to a more connected world. This is the fourth industrial revolution, as we call it, and I don't think that any government can eventually stop it, but it will take time.
Reply is that we are dealing a lot within Amsterdam with the regulatory bodies and ask them for temporary and local regulation holidays or regulation exemptions. and then with the regulatory body we review every 6 months if regulations needs to be adapted. So instead of fighting them, it's just get them involved like we do with our citizens, get them involved in a very, very early stage and keep that conversation open, and it has been beneficial to a lot of new projects and inventions in Amsterdam.
또 질문이 있으신가요? 네, 저쪽에 시간상 마지막으로 질문 받는 걸로 하도록 하겠습니다.
Thank you for your delivering the good speech. I'm afraid I also have some question about agriculture system. As you know, in Korea is one of the aging countries, so I just wonder how long does it take it to elder people or senior people or senior farmer to learn the operate the high technology machines in their farmland?
Can you repeat it because I.
Yes. Actually, Korea is one of the aging countries, so there are so many senior farmers rather than the young farmers. So I just wonder, is it easy to learn how to operate the machine for the elder farmers?
Basically, with all those technologies, I presented also in the presentation. But also innovative industries in the Netherlands, we developed those systems such in a way that the farmer doesn't have to know how to operate the computer, but it's really like intuitive. So it basically has to do with design of user interface and being really smart of all the operations which are on the machine. As you can imagine, like agricultural machinery, it has a lot of like buttons and a lot of like settings. But you need to make those such intuitive that also for the people which are less into technology, which are less into operating systems or computers, can even operate it. So that's really crucial for those technologies. I think you can invent a really smart machine, but if no one can operate, then the machine is not smart. But one funny thing is also that that's also happening in the Netherlands, that the people who are farmers in the Netherlands, they get older and older and older because no one wants to work in agriculture. You also see when you make machines a little bit more smart, a little bit more tech, that young people want to re-enter agriculture because those kinds of high intelligent smart machines. So yeah, it can also help, I think, to lower the age of the farmer, maybe, those machines. I really believe in that.
Very interesting view. 시간이 없어서 뭐 질문이 없으시면 일단 여기서 좀 정리하는 걸로 하고요. 다음은 저희 유재석 씨에게 테이블을 넘기도록 그래서 제가 소개를 하는 걸로 할까요? 예, 지금 그냥 마무리만 할까요? 네, 오늘 발표해주신 모든 네 분들께 감사 인사드리고요. 여러분 열심히 들어주셔서 대단히 감사합니다. Thank you, everyone.
지금 들으시는 애국가와 함께 문을 연 2017 키 플랫폼. 이제 이틀간의 일정을 모두 마치고 마지막 순서만 남겨두고 있습니다. 이틀 동안 우리는 대혼돈이 발생해도 이를 돌파할 수 있는 리마스터링의 지혜를 모아보았습니다. 지혜를 실행하여 불확실한 미래를 뚫고 성공 신화를 이어나갈 각오도 다지게 되었다고 생각합니다. 이 노력의 성공을 위해 대한민국이 반드시 풀어야 할 장기 과제가 있습니다. 키 플랫폼은 이를 교육으로 보고 있습니다. 디지털 경제 시대, 완전히 다른 패러다임에 적응할 수 있는 교육에 우리의 미래가 달려 있습니다. 2017 키 플랫폼은 디지털 경제, 새로운 교육의 미래에 대한 분야에서 한국 교육계의 최고 어른이시자 전문가이신 이우영 한국 폴리텍 대학 이사장님을 모셔서 특강을 들어보는 것으로 올해 일정을 마감하려 합니다. 이우영 이사장님은 전국 35개 캠퍼스를 총괄하는 한국 폴리텍 대학 수장으로서 직업훈련에 가깝던 대학을 디지털 경제를 선도하는 교육기관으로 바꿔놓은 세계적인 교육 혁신가이십니다. 뜨거운 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
예, 여러분 반갑습니다. 키 플랫폼 2017 폐막 마무리를 제가 하게 돼서 기쁘고 영광스럽게 생각합니다. 제가 오늘 여러분께 드리고 싶은 말씀은 여러분께 어떤 제가 가지고 있는 지식의 답을 드리기 위해서 온 것은 아닙니다. 마지막 주제로서 여러분이 이틀 동안에 공부하셨던 디지털 경제가 가져올 수많은 변화들, 너무나 급격하게 변하는 이 환경 속에서 우리는 교육을 통해서 어떻게 준비할 건가 하는 것들을 여러분과 같이 질문하고 고민하고 생각하는 시간으로 오늘 마지막 마무리를 해볼까 하는 생각입니다. 저는 25년간 대학교에서 학생들을 가르쳐 왔습니다. 제 전공은 기계공학이고요. 그런데 지금도 끊임없이 제 주위에 있는 많은 분들이 저한테 질문을 많이 합니다. 다음번 우리 아이들의 미래를 위해서 어떤 전공을 택하는 게 좋습니까? 어떤 방향으로 아이를 교육시키면 좋겠습니까? 하는 질문을 많이 하십니다. 여러분도 잘 아시다시피 그렇지만 여전히 지금도 대한민국은 전 세계에서 가장 높은 사교육비를 지출하고 있는 나라고요. 전 세계에서 가장 높은 입시 과열 속에 있는 나라 중에 하나입니다. 다행인지 불행인지는 모르겠네요. 내년부터 대한민국도 학령 인구가 급격히 감소하면서 현재 대한민국에 존재하는 2년제, 4년제 대학 300여 개의 대학이 커다란 위험에 직면해 있습니다. 또한 급격한 일자리 변화와 함께 이러한 대학들이 어떻게 변화되고 바뀌어 가야 하는지를 우리 다 같이 지금까지 공부해왔던 내용과 사회기술의 변화를 살펴보면서 일자리의 변화와 교육의 변화가 어떻게 갈지 같이 공부하는 그런 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 우리가 지금까지 이틀간 공부했지만 디지털 경제는 크게 플랫폼 경제 그리고 오픈 이노베이션, 개방형 혁신이죠. 그냥 혁신이 아니고요. 개방형 혁신을 통해서 모든 것이 합쳐져서 궁극적으로는 사람 개개인 모두가 플랫폼이 되는 사회로 가게 될 것입니다. 여러분 지금 보시는 이 그림은 우리 인간 뇌 세포에 있는 정말 수없이 많은 1000억 개 이상의 신경망 회로를 보고 계십니다. 일찍이 스티브 잡스는 창조성은 연결이다라고 했습니다. 창조성은 천재로부터 나오는 것이 아니고 연결해서 있다. 지금 이 디지털 경제 사회, 4차 산업혁명 시대에 딱 맞는 단어인 것 같습니다. 우리가 디지털 경제를 말할 때 엄청나게 빠른 속도로 데이터가 증가하고 있는 현상을 여러분들은 보고 계십니다. 왼쪽에 있는 데이터가요, 제가 작년에 지멘스를 방문했을 때 받아온 데이터입니다. 우리 인간이 경제 활동을 시작한 이래로 서기 2000년까지 축적되었던 데이터의 수는 2 곱하기 10의 18 제곱, 0이 18개죠. 2 엑사바이트라고 전문가들이 말하고 있습니다. 놀랍게도 오늘날 단 하루에 생성되는 데이터의 양과 맞먹는 양이고요. 더욱더 놀라운 것은 매 2년 주기로 이 데이터의 양은 기하급수적으로 2배씩 늘어납니다. 우리는 지금 기하급수적으로 늘어나는 빅데이터 시대에 살고 있는 것이죠. 오른쪽 그래프를 봐주시면 지멘스 공장, 현재 아마도 전 세계에서 스마트 팩토리를 가장 앞서서 하고 있다는 공장일 것입니다. 암베르크에 있는 공장인데요. 그 공장을 제가 작년에 방문했었습니다. 이 공장에서는 한 개의 공정 라인에서 100가지 서로 다른 제품을 고객의 요구에 따라서 수시로 만들어내고 있습니다. 그 이유는 무엇일까요? 2000년도에 이 공장에서 생산에 필요에 활용했던 데이터는 5만 개에 불과했습니다만 2015년도 현재 2015년 2년 전이죠. 네, 그것의 1000배인 5천만 개의 데이터를 활용하고 수만 개의 센서가 연결이 되어서 생산성을 높여가고 있었습니다. 불과 10년 전에 비해서 종업원의 숫자는 그대로인데 생산성은 8배로 늘었다는 얘기죠. 유럽에서 고객이 주문을 하면 24시간 이내에 납품이 되는 초신속 타임 투 마켓을 이뤄낸 공장이 되겠습니다. 아울러 불량률도 11ppm, 100만 개당 11개 이하의 불량률을 자랑을 하고 있습니다. 디지털 경제를 가속화하는 두 번째는 여러분 잘 아시는 인공지능의 발전의 속도겠죠. 대한민국은 작년에 굉장히 행복한 놀라운 경험을 했습니다. 2016년도에 인공지능 알파고와 전 세계에서 가장 뛰어난 바둑 실력을 가진 이세돌 구단의 대결이 있었던 것을 여러분 기억하실 겁니다. 우리는 많은 충격을 보았죠. 인공지능의 전문가들이 말하는 인공지능의 데이터의 발전 속도는 여러분들이 보시는 그래프 또는 이것보다 더 급격할 수도 있다고 봅니다. 전문가들이 지금 현재 우리의 인공지능의 수준은 바로 지혜 인공지능 수준 또는 그 이상이다. 2023년이 되면 우리 인간 한 사람 한 사람이 가지고 있는 지능의 수준을 뛰어넘을 것이다. 2045년이 되면 이 그래프에서 보시는 것처럼 지구상에 존재하는 온 인류의 지능을 합친 것보다도 같거나 더 높은 시대, 싱귤레리티의 시대가 온다라고 전문가들은 예측을 하고 있습니다. 놀라운 예측인데 맞을까요? 어떻게 생각하십니까? 발전 속도가. 저는 기계공학을 전공했는데 아마 더 빨리 가지 않을까 싶습니다. 이런 시대 디지털 경제는 플랫폼 사회라고 제가 말씀을 드렸는데요. 플랫폼 경제는 세 가지의 축으로 이루어졌다고 제 나름대로 정리를 해봤습니다. 구글이나 애플이나 페이스북이나 아마존 같은 서비스 플랫폼이 있을 수 있겠고요. 좀 전에 말씀드린 지멘스라든가 또는 지이 같은 제조 플랫폼이 있겠고, 이 모든 것들을 의사소통을 하고 정책을 결정하는 정책 플랫폼으로 나눠볼 수 있겠습니다. 물론 하부에 인텔이나 마이크로소프트나 삼성 같은 그런 소프트웨어 하드웨어 공급업체가 있겠고요. 또 우리나라의 SK텔레콤, KT, U+와 같은 커뮤니케이션 네트워크 공급 회사들이 있겠죠. 이런 회사들이 합쳐서 점점 더 앞으로 플랫폼 경제는 개방과 공유와 참여를 통해서 엄청난 속도로 발전해 나갈 것입니다. 플랫폼 경제에 있어서 우리가 떼놓지 말고 넘어가야 되지 않을 단어가 하나 있습니다. 노동의 변화, 일자리의 변화, 노동의 변화, 교육의 변화가 한꺼번에 변화가 일어나겠죠. 노동의 변화 당연히 일하는 방식의 변화를 얘기할 것입니다. 우리는 전 세계에서 수많은 전문가 또는 수많은 전문 팀들과 함께 언제든지 일을 할 수가 있을 것입니다. 클라우드 워킹 또는 휴먼 클라우드의 개념이 들어오고 있고 지금도 많이 확산되고 있습니다. 아마도 직업의 영역과 사생활의 영역이 모호해지는 시대, 시간과 공간을 뛰어넘는 경계가 모호한 시대, 이런 시대에 앞으로 노동의 변화가 이루어지지 않을까 생각을 하고 있습니다. 우리가 이틀까지 봐왔던 디지털 경제의 사회 변화, 좀 전에 전 세션에서도 있었지만 고령화 시대에 어떻게 살아갈 것인가 하는 부분, 기술의 변화. 그렇지만 온라인 평생교육, 무료교육 같은 개념이 점점 더 활성화될 것이고요. 일자리의 변화에 따라서 교육의 변화는 더욱더 빨리 바뀔 것이라고 보고 있습니다. 대한민국은 상당히 빠른 나라입니다. 전 세계에서 변화를 가장 즐기는 나라고 인터넷 인프라가 잘 돼 있는 나라죠. 물론 인터넷을 구동하기 위한 소프트웨어 기술 수준은 아직까지는 거기에 못 미치고 있지만 대한민국도 상당히 빠른 나라입니다. 4차 산업혁명을 대비하기 위해서 대한민국 정부는 그동안 이러한 준비를 해왔습니다. 대한민국이 3개 부처가 있습니다. 미래창조부, 산업통상자원부, 고용노동부를 통해서 2015년부터 어떤 재정 지원을 효과적으로 할 것이냐, 어떤 법과 규제를 없애기 위한 여러 가지 제도를 만들 것이냐 준비를 해왔습니다. 대체적으로 보면 정부 부처가 만들어놓은 3가지의 공통직동은 오른쪽에 보시는 바와 같습니다. 여러분들 상식적으로 알고 있는 내용이 되겠습니다. 증강현실, 가상현실을 비롯해서 ESS 같은 에너지 저장 장치랄지요, 빅데이터, 첨단 신소재 이런 것들이 되겠습니다. 지금 이미 우리 주위에는 많은 일자리들이 대체가 되어 있습니다. 이미 소멸됐죠. 다보스 포럼에서 710만 개의 일자리가 2020년까지 사라질 것이라고 하였는데, 이 그림을 보시면 어떤 일자리가 현재까지 바뀌어 와 있고 앞으로 어떤 일자리들은 인간과 같이 협업을 하든지, 그 로봇과 인간과 공장에서 같이 일하든지 업무를 보든지 또는 대체가 되든지 하는 영역을 구분해 놨습니다. 대체적으로 사람이 하는 일에 있어서 감정 지식이 들어갔느냐, 육체 노동이냐, 또는 정형 반복이냐, 비정형 비반복이냐에 따라서 이런 일자리들은 어떻게 변화가 될 것인지를 우리가 간접적으로나마 알 수 있을 것입니다. 제가 여기서 어떤 일자리가 구체적으로 미래에 없어질 것이다, 어떤 일자리가 대체될 것이다라고 정확하게 찝어서 말씀은 드리지 못할 겁니다. 다만 우리가 여기서 지금 생각해야 될 부분은 어떤 분야의 일자리가 필요할 것인가, 그걸 생각해 볼 수가 있는 거죠. 빅데이터, 상당히 많은 빅데이터를 가지고 우리가 필요로 하는 가치를 입혀서 더 새로운 창의적인 제품을 만들 수 있는 창의력이 요구되는 분야가 분명히 요구될 것이고요. 우버나 에어비앤비와 같은 온디맨드, 주문형 경제의 기술을 구현하고 플랫폼을 만들 수 있는 기술도 필요하겠죠. 또 이러한 환경에 적응할 수 있는 휴먼 클라우드 워킹을 적응할 수 있는 근로자들이 일자리 분야에서 많이 필요하게 될 것이라고 봅니다. 우리가 시장과 고객의 관점에서 요구하는 역량을 바라보면 또 새로운 일자리가 어디서 나올 것인지를 아마 알 수 있을 것이라고 봅니다. 우리 소비자들은 지금 내가 필요로 하는 나만의 제품을 갖기를 원하죠. 예. 그래서 실제 아이디어를 구현하고 제품을 설계하는 단계에서부터 고객은 온라인으로 기업과 같이 일을 하면서 나만의 독특한 제품과 아이디어를 만들기를 원하고 있습니다. 오픈 이노베이션을 통해서, 메이커를 통해서 그러한 제품, 그러한 혁신의 운동들이 지금 시작이 되고 있죠. 아울러서 기업 내에서는 경영 전반에 관련된 것과 또 공장 내에서 이루어지는 여러 가지 생산 활동들이 수평적, 수직적으로 결합이 되면서 스마트 팩토리를 구현할 수 있는 역량이 필요할 것입니다. 가까운 기업, 먼 기업, 모든 일터에서 같이 협업을 하고 일할 수 있는 능력, 플래그 앤 워크죠. 새로운 협력 생태계를 만들어가고 거기에 적응해 나갈 수 있는 인력들, 이런 역량을 가진 이런 사람들이 아마 필요하지 않을까 생각을 합니다. 제가 새로운 학교의 모델들을 지금부터 간단하게 설명을 하고 제 강연을 마칠까 합니다. 2017년 1월, 얼마 전이죠. 네. IBM의 CEO이신 지미 로메츠라고 하는 분이 세계 경제 포럼에서 이런 말씀을 하셨어요. 앞으로는 화이트 칼라, 블루 칼라의 일자리는 소멸되고 뉴 칼라 일자리, 뉴 칼라에 필요한 인재가 필요할 것이다. 이제는 더 이상 4년제 대학 졸업자는 필요 없다. 인공지능과 정보기술을 갖춘 실무자를 길러내야 된다. 그런데 그런 실무자를 어떻게 길러낼 것인가가 우리의 화두다. 그가 말하는 뉴칼라 인재의 정의는 학력과 관계없이 4차 산업혁명을 적응하는 근로자 계급이라고 말하고 있습니다. IBM은 이런 아이디어를 가지고 벌써 2011년부터 뉴칼라형 인재를 양성하기에는 프로그램을 시작을 해왔습니다. 피텍이라고 하는 프로그램인데요. 저는 2015년도에 뉴욕 본사에 있는 IBM을 방문을 해서 이 피텍을 제가 경영하고 있는 한국 폴리텍 대학에 도입하고자 협의하러 간 적이 있었습니다. IBM이 주관이 되어서 뉴욕 교육청과 뉴욕 인근의 대학과 협업을 통해서 인근의 고등학교, 제가 방문한 고등학교는 폴 로빈슨 스쿨이었는데요. IBM이 최초로 이 프로그램을 도입한 학교가 되겠습니다. 뉴욕 브루클린의 빈민가에 있는 넓고 허름한 그런 고등학교입니다. 다문화 학생들만 위주로 있고요. 학생들이 학업에 대한 관심이 없었습니다. 다문화 학생들이 학업에 관심이 없는 학생들을 훈련을 통해서 6년간의 훈련을 통해서 공교육 혁신을 통해서 많은 학생들이 행복을 찾고 어떤 학생들은 오바마와 함께 자랑스럽게 사진을 찍는 그 사진이 복도에 걸려 있는 모습을 보고 아, 이게 우리가 앞으로 4차 산업혁명 시대 공교육이 가야 될 방향임을 제가 찾았습니다. 작년이죠. 최근에 작년부터 IBM이 이 피텍에 새로 도입한 첨단 과정이 있습니다. 바로 무엇이냐면 IBM이 개발한 인공지능 왓슨을 도입을 했습니다. 티처 어드바이저 프로그램을 도입을 해서 교사들한테 최적화된 학습 프로그램을 활용할 수 있게 만들어 주었고요. 10년 전부터 활발하게 일어나고 있는 그 미국의 메이커스 무브먼트를 통해서 우리 학생들이 디지털 환경에서 자기 아이디어를 가지고 학생들과 같이 공유와 협업을 통해서 새로운 시제품을 만들고 구현해 볼 수 있는 메이커 교육을 그 과정에 녹여서 같이 시작을 하고 있습니다. 네, 지금까지 말씀드린 피텍 과정이 우리가 현재 생각해야 될 그러한 모델이 아닌가 생각을 하고 있습니다. 우리는 더 이상 지금과 같이 이런 변화하는 시대에 학위를 받기 위해서 단지 학위라고 하는 간판을 받기 위해서 2년제, 3년제 대학을 다녀야 할까요? 1997년 피터 드러커는 지금으로부터 30년 후 대규모 대학 캠퍼스는 유물될 것이다. 대학들은 생존하지 못할 것이다. 이는 처음으로 책이 인쇄되었을 때만큼이나 큰 변화다. 20년 전 말씀인데요. 현실 세계와 가상 세계를 결합한 새로운 형태의 교육이 출현할 것을 이미 피터 드러커는 예견을 한 것 같습니다. 지금 실리콘밸리나 동부의 아이비리그를 중심으로 새로운 형태의 학습 형태, 학습 기관들이 나타나고 있는 건 여러분들이 여러 언론을 통해서 잘 알고 계실 겁니다. IBM 같은 실리콘밸리를 중심으로 하는 무크, 여러분들 많이 들어보셨죠? 예, 온라인 교육 과정, 이 과정을 하나를 통해서 나노학위, 나노 디그리 또는 마이크로 디그리 형태로 아주 잘게 쪼갠 전공 학위를 이수를 합니다. 이 이수한 모든 학습 증거들은 개개인이 관리를 하면서 디지털 형태로 모든 증거들을 관리합니다. 이것 때문에 최근 실리콘밸리에서는 기업 내에서의 채용의 패턴이 바뀌고 있습니다. 명문대 졸업장을 가진 사람보다 이런 온라인 플랫폼을 이용해서 자기 학습을 달성한 사람들이 취업을 하고 있는 흐름으로 많이 바뀌고 있다는 것입니다. 2조 4천억 불의 세계 온라인 교육 시장이 존재하고 있습니다. 지금 우리는 무엇을 하고 있을까요? 다행히 대한민국은 K-MOOC라고 하는 프로그램을 2015년부터 시작을 했고 올해는 300개까지 K-MOOC를 통해서 교육훈련 과정을 제공할 것입니다. 여러분들 미네르바 스쿨은 언론을 통해서 많이 들어보셨죠? 예, 아주 혁신적인 캠퍼스가 없는 온라인 학교입니다. 2014년 가을에 오픈을 했죠. 오픈할 때 아이비리그보다도 훨씬 높은 경쟁률을 기록을 했다 하고 작년에도 전 세계에서 16,000명 이상이 지원을 해서 150명을 선발했습니다. 그 학생들이 지금 오늘 한국에 와서 6개월 과정 공부를 하고 있습니다. 처음 학생들이 모집이 되면 샌프란시스코 본사죠. 6개월 공부를 하고 모든 과정은 온라인으로 전 세계 6개국을 돌면서 6개월씩 온라인 수업과 현장 프로젝트를 통해서 철저하게 학습을 하는, 그러면서 아이비리그 수준의 4분의 1 수준의 저렴한 등록금으로 공부를 하고 있는 혁신적인 학교입니다. 미네소타에 있는 로체스터 캠퍼스입니다. 이 로체스터는 인근의 의료 보건 분야에 새로운 산업단지가 형성되면서 갑작스럽게 새로운 인력을 양성할 필요성이 느꼈습니다. 전통적인 새로운 대학교를 설립하려고 그러면 수천억 원의 비용이, 막대한 비용이 들죠. 미네르바는 이러한 방식을 택하지 않고요. 기존에 방치되어 있던 쇼핑몰을 교실로 개조했고요. YMCA 주변 아파트들을 임차를 해서 기숙사라든지 체육시설로 활용을 했습니다. 등록금 말할 것도 없이 상당히 저렴합니다. 1만 3천 불 정도 된다고 합니다. 한국도 그런 사례가 있습니다. 제가 경영하고 있는 코리아 폴리텍, 35번째 한국 폴리텍은 캠퍼스가 35개가 있습니다. 전국에 35번째 캠퍼스를 작년에 분당에 아주 노후된 빌딩을 매입을 해서 캠퍼스가 운동장이 없는 도심형 캠퍼스로 시작을 했습니다. 이 과정의 특징은 4차 산업혁명에 필요한 융합교과목만을 개설을 하고 있습니다. 보시는 바와 같이 바이오와 데이터가 융합된 전공, 금융과 IT가 융합된 전공, 인베디드 기반 스마트 팩토리 전공을 1년 이내의 과정, 10개월 과정으로 1300시간에 운영을 하고 있습니다. 들어오는 학생의 수준은 4년제 대학교를 졸업한 전공 불문, 인문학, 공학 전공 불문 뽑았습니다. 작년 1년 동안 10개월 동안 한 결과 중견기업, 대기업, 대한민국에 내놓으란 하나은행을 비롯해서 바이오 업계들 92.2%의 취업률을 달성을 했고요. 아마 대한민국에서 처음으로 4차 산업혁명을 대비한 융합교과 과목을 직업 훈련 과정을 통해서 공급을 한 사례가 될 것입니다. 무크를 통해서 학습을 한 사례를 하나 보여드리겠습니다. MIT에 어떤 학생이 온라인을 통해서 컴퓨터 공학 전공을 하고 싶은데 7과목을 수강을 하게 되면 그 학생은 MIT와 똑같은 컴퓨터 공학의 수준 높은 강의를 듣게 되고 수준 높은 시험을 똑같이 치르게 됩니다. 그 시험을 통해서 패스를 하게 되면 본인이 원하면 단돈 425달러만 지불하면 수료증을 받게 됩니다. 한 예로 MIT에서 생물학 강의를 전 세계 수만 명한테 오픈을 했는데요. 몽고 지방에 있는 15살 어린 학생이 그 어려운 시험을 만점을 받았습니다. MIT에서 그 학생을 찾았습니다. 몽고에 있는 15살 학생이었습니다. 그 학생은 그 다음에 MIT 정규과정에 입학을 했습니다. 이러한 학습 방법이 변화와 함께 지금 바뀌고 있는 학습 도구의 혁신, 여러분들 보고 계시죠? 증강현실과 가상현실, 롤러블 디스플레이, 이런 것들을 학습 도구를 통해서 한국의 몇몇 대학에서도 이미 교과서가 없이 융복합된 전자교재로 수업을 시작하고 있고, 마찬가지로 직업훈련에 있어서도 모바일 환경에서 스마트한 국가 직무 능력, 내셔널 컴피턴시 스탠다드의 실습에 도입을 하고 있습니다. 이걸 스마트 KNC라고 저희들이 부르고 있습니다. 이제 제 강연을 마무리하겠습니다. 엘빈 토플러는 속도의 충돌에서 변화의 속도에 대한 것을 언급을 했습니다. 여러분 잘 아시죠? 기업은 시속 100마일의 속도로 달려가고 있다. 정부는 25마일의 속도다. 공교육은 시속 10마일의 속도로 달려가고 있다. 엘빈 토플러는 돌아가셨지만 예전에 하신 말씀입니다. 그러나 지금 이렇게 빠르게 변화하는 디지털 경제, 디지털 환경에서 우리 공교육의 속도가 여전히 기업에 비해서 10마일의 속도로 느리게 달려가야 될까요? 지금 그렇게 가고 있다고 보고 계십니까? 제가 지금까지 설명드린 실리콘밸리, 아이비리그에서 이루어지는 무크라든지 다른 최첨단 학습의 변화와 혁신을 보게 된다면 이제는 이러한 속도는 더 이상 우리한테 의미가 없을지도 모릅니다. 이미 우리에게, 우리의 마음속에, 그리고 오늘 여러분들 이 자리에 계신 모든 분들에게는 아마 속도의 변화가 더 빨리 와 계실 거라고 보고 있습니다. 키 플랫폼 2017 마지막 클로징에서 제가 이런 말씀을 드리게 돼서 무한히 기쁘게 생각합니다. 여러분들한테 마지막으로 제가 드리고 싶은 질문, 그렇다 그러면 우리가 이틀 동안 공부했던 이 많은 것들이 우리는 어떤 선택을 해야 될 것인가? 전통적인 담쟁이 덩굴에 갇힌 대학의 형태를 그대로 따라갈 것입니까? 우리 미래의 교육, 우리가 끌려갈 것입니까? 선도해 나갈 것입니까? 그것은 각자 오늘 계신 여러분들이 속한 기관, 여러분들이 속한 가정, 그리고 여러분 개개인의 마음속에서 어떻게 결정하느냐에 따라서 결정될 것이라고 보고 있습니다. 감사합니다.
마지막 특별 강연을 끝으로 2017 키 플랫폼 이틀간의 모든 일정을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 이틀 동안 우리는 대혼돈이 발생해도 이를 돌파할 수 있는 리마스터링의 지혜들을 살펴보았습니다. 다소 무겁고 어려운 주제임에도 끝까지 함께해 주신 여러분께 진심으로 감사를 드립니다. 키 플랫폼은 보다 혁신적인 주제와 새로운 내용으로 여러분들을 다시 찾아뵙도록 하겠습니다. 지혜를 실행하여 불확실한 미래를 당당하게 걸어나갈 수 있도록 여러분들을 적극 후원하겠습니다. 감사합니다.